Good morning, everyone, and welcome to part 3, day 3 of this ASA Abloy virtual instructor-led training course on hardware applications specific to a hospital. My name is Katie Flower. I will be your lead instructor. Good to see you again. And just a reminder that this session is being recorded. If you happen to miss any of the sessions for whatever reason, you can always review them on the ASA Abloy Academy virtual instructor-led training tab. Top right-hand corner, there is a link to all of the previously recorded sessions. This way, if you do miss one or two, I realize this course stretches out over 2 weeks. It is an 8-part series, and you can stay caught up by reviewing any of the recordings that you may miss part of or the full thing for whatever reason. So they're there for your use, and they'll be up there for forever. So if you need to ever go back and take a look at something, it will be there. The Q&A for this session, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions after each opening. I've got 3 openings today that we'll be taking a look at, and then that's the format for the rest of the way through. There will be 3 openings per session that we will discuss in depth. And if you have any questions on a particular opening, feel free to type in your question and I'll review them at the end of each opening. Within 24 hours, you will receive a thank you email. Each one of these sessions is worth 1 credit hour from ASA Abloy. You'll get an email which you can use for continuing education if you need to as proof for self-reporting purposes. So as I mentioned, please feel free to ask questions anytime throughout the presentation and after each hardware set, after each opening. Before we get into the hardware sets, I just want to point out a couple of things on ASA Abloy specifications, or whether they're written from an architect. The CSI, Construction Specification Institute, has the various divisions and the various sections. These sections are the most common for the related sections. So if you see these listed in a hardware set, door hardware is 087100, that tells you that item is being supplied in that division, in that section. Automatic operators could be also listed in the hardware set, but if you see this section, then you would go to that section for more information, and that's where that package would be bid typically. You have interior sliding doors, cash allowances, access control. Division 28 is your access control, and there's a lot of coordination back and forth between the various sections. Additionally, the manufacturer's abbreviations will be found at the part 3 of the specification right before the hardware sets. And these are the actual manufacturers being used in the hardware sets. Other manufacturers that are acceptable are listed in part 2 product of your specification. I also want to note that the openings we will be reviewing are from a very large 18-story brand new construction hospital. It was a brand new key system, brand new hospital. They had an existing facility that they were going to reuse in different ways, but the owner, the architect, myself as a specification consultant, and my team spent over 250 hours of coordination meetings, liaison meetings with the staff from the hospital, talking about the flow of how they were going to be using the elevators and moving patients from one area to another. So hospitals take an extreme amount. When you're writing a specification for a hospital, they take an extreme amount of asking the right questions, making sure that the right people are in the room to get the correct answers. We also did mock-ups. Once the specification was written, before it went out to bid, they had areas mocked up. The contractor built an actual operating room. They built a patient bedroom, and they built some typical rooms off-site so that nurses and doctors and staff could come in and look at things and see the space and make sure that everything was the way that they intended it to be, so that we could make any corrections. And there were several times throughout this process where we did make adjustments to the hardware sets based on the owner input. And it's very critical to get the owner's input on decisions such as what brands would be acceptable, the types of functions, whether they're access control functions or mechanical functions. All of these things need to be talked about and checked off and signed off on. 13,000 plus openings on this project. And so when it comes to building a hardware set, you want to make sure that you capture as many openings under each hardware set as you can. If they are like openings with the same functionality, group them together in the same hardware set. That's why hardware sets in a specification are not as detailed as the submittal set. So the first one we'll take a look at is a single door, clean workroom. And first we're going to take a look at the plans to see where it's located. For this door opening, we will be looking at a clean workroom on the first floor of an 18-story hospital. It is a high traffic hospital. The key plan shows us that the door is located within area A, and so you can see where it is in relation to the rest of the building. This is the clean workroom. I have highlighted it. I want to zoom out so that you can get a little bit of a feel for where it is in the building. There's exam rooms. This is near the emergency department. So the patients will be just coming into the hospital. They'll get their exam to figure out where they need to go. And the clean workrooms serve this care area. The exit access corridors are around the perimeter. And each of these are divided into separate care suites. You can see the firewalls here that separate into different care suites. So this particular clean workroom is within this care suite. We have exam rooms. We've got some kind of funky looking doors here, and we will take a look at those at a later date in a different session. Patient toilet that swings in both directions. We'll take a look at that later as well. But taking a look at this clean workroom, a clean workroom is nothing more than just a large storage area for clean equipment and materials, things like syringes and bandages and things that they'll be going in and out quite frequently throughout the day. The difference between this clean workroom and the soiled workroom is this is for the dirty stuff that they're going to be throwing out, or they're going to send it downstairs into the basement to get sanitized and repackaged and then replenish the stock in the clean workroom. So depending on the types of things. But you notice this one has card access for this door, and the clean workroom does not have the same notation. So even though they're the same size doors, they can't be in the same hardware set. The other reason we can't put them in the same hardware set, if you look at these dotted lines, those indicate some kind of movable storage racks or storage items. This dotted line is for ADA clearances, but these dotted lines indicate some kind of shelving, some kind of storage racks. There's a little sink here in the corner. There is no card access, at least not hardwired card access on these doors. But I would look on the door schedule to see if the architect had noted, and they do want some kind of card access. It's just not going to be hardwired. This indicates to me that I'm going to need an overhead stop. There's 2'4" distance between the door and the wall, and that's just enough room for them to put materials behind here. So a wall stop is not going to work. We need to use an overhead stop for this hardware set. Those are the kinds of things that I look for when I'm looking at the floor plans, looking at the overall area, the use, where it is within the building. Certainly pick up the note that it's fire rated. You can see the 1 hour partition here. This architect underneath the door number does list the fire rating. Many architects don't. But if you look in conjunction at the door schedule at the same time, you would pick that information up, that it is a 45-minute rated door. And as we talked about in the code class yesterday, that makes perfect sense because any storage room that's over 100 square feet does need 1 hour fire resistance partition and 45-minute rated doors. Remember also that there will be at least half a dozen clean workrooms on every single floor times 18 floors. That's a lot of clean workrooms. And you do have to visually double check that the situation is the same. You may have some that do have wall stops and others that you have to use an overhead stop. There is a way to get around that in the specification set by giving the bidder an option based on the actual condition at the wall, and then they have to select. But all of the clean workrooms in this particular hospital were laid out the same way. That made it very handy. They could all go in the same hardware set. The other thing is the width of the door. Very common in hospitals. We're going to have wider doors. You can get that information from the door schedule. Because I'm not going to cut back and forth between the door schedule, I did include that information in the hardware sets that you're going to see, but that's just for information purposes only. That's not normally information that you find in the hardware set itself. As I mentioned, this is a fire rated opening, fire rated wall, and there is no card access, or at least not hardwired card access. So my thoughts when I'm looking at a clean workroom, my thoughts for questions to the owner, questions of the architect, do they want these a keyed storeroom function, or is there a need for some kind of a push button access control? Sometimes you'll see that as a note on the door schedule. It depends on what phase of design that you are getting involved in writing the specification. Clearly, the more information that you have, the easier it is to write the specification. But sometimes when you write the initial specification, you don't have all the information, and then you'll have several different revisions until you get to the right before the final spec is released for bid. The other thing I want to remind everybody of, this specification was written over the course of a 4-year span, and then it took a couple years for the building to be constructed. So the videos of these doors already are 3 years old when you look at the video. These model numbers, some of these part numbers are old because the spec was finished in 2014, and by now some of these numbers are changed or different. And sometimes when you get a specification, you'll see some older numbers and you need to convert those to the newer number because hardware changes quite frequently, especially technology. As I mentioned before, the hardware set number in this case is number 364. All of the doors would be listed here. I only include the one that we're focusing on today, but all of the clean workroom and any other door that is the same hardware would be listed under this set. And because we had over 13,000 openings in this project, there were some sets that had over 150, 200 doors in the same set. And if you're detailing the set and you've got some that are 3'6" and some that are 3'8" and some that are 4 foot wide doors, you would break it into 364.01, 364.02, and whatever iteration, and keep the doors that are exactly alike in the same set. The hardware is the same with the exception of the sizes. So this information that I have, single clean workroom, 3'6" by 7 foot, wood door by hollow metal door or hollow metal frame, 45-minute rated. This information normally comes from the door schedule. The only reason that I have it here is for instructional purposes only. You're typically not going to see this in a specification set. We'll take a look at all of these hardware items one by one. I just want you to glance at them and notice that the finishes listed are the finishes. Some are BHMA numbers and some are US numbers. That varies depending on the manufacturer and what they use to build their part string. If you are taking a DHI class going for your certification, they want to see the BHMA numbers on everything instead of some US numbers and some BHMA numbers. It's important to learn both and to know what the base material is. 626 is satin chrome on a brass or bronze base metal. 652 is satin chrome on a steel base metal. And this number here is the hardware set. The hardware section 087100 is the CSI 3-part specification section. And in this case, all of these items are being supplied and furnished in the hardware package. Anytime you see a lightning bolt, that means it's an electrified product. And anytime that we have an electrified product, we need some kind of operations narrative. This one's very sweet and simple. Let's take a look at what the opening actually looks like and how it functions. So the first thing that we have to do when we're building a hardware set is hang the door. The hanging method, as we mentioned in the first session, can be commercial butt hinges, continuous hinges, or pivots. And you do try to match the appropriate hanging method for the frequency of use, the location, and all of the information that you have about the opening. A clean workroom is a storeroom, and a storeroom will get quite a bit of frequency of use. So it is a wide, heavy door. Heavyweight hinges were selected 5 inches high because anytime we have a wide door, the taller the hinge, the more it helps disperse the weight over the height of the opening. And so 4.5 inch wide, the door only needs to swing a little over 90 degrees, and a 4.5 inch wide hinge could allow this door to swing 180 degrees if there wasn't something behind the door blocking the door. The McKinney 5-knuckle heavyweight series hinge, here you can tell that it's heavyweight because of the 4 bearing raceways. We use the TA, the anti-friction bearing, which is very similar to a ball bearing hinge, but it's all encompassed into the bearing. It's oil-light bearing, and there's no way to break into it. Securing the door. The owner didn't want card access for these doors, probably because of the quantity of them, but they didn't want the staff to have to use a key either. They went with the combination proximity keypad where you can enter a code, and they could program prox cards to open these as well. It does have key override if the battery happens to die, free egress from the inside. Mortise locks were chosen by the owner for this project because a Mortise lock in a hospital environment, you have a lot more functions to be able to choose from. They're durable. They're easy to have their locksmith maintain. If a spindle breaks, they can replace a spindle very easily. Any of the little springs or parts, they can replace those, repair those themselves. And so Mortise locks are the standard throughout this facility. There will be some cases like patient bedrooms where hospital latches, the cylindrical version of the hospital latch are used, but any high frequency door, any of the main points of entry will be Mortise locks. The closer, heavy duty closer, any storage room, especially a fire rated storage room, they cannot have a mechanical hold open on these doors. But the next best thing is to specify delayed action. It's a very inexpensive add, and it's a valve that's added to the door closer so that once you open the door and let go, instead of the door closing immediately, the closing cycle is delayed 3 seconds or 6 seconds or whatever you set it for before the door starts to close. This way, if you're pushing a cart through this opening, you've got one of those hand carts with your different materials on it, and you're going in, you're pulling some things to bring to down the hall to an exam room, you don't have to worry about fighting the door. It's something this owner wanted. This architect uses it. They do a lot of, this architect does a lot of hospitals across the country, and they like to use delayed action on any storage room. And again, it makes a lot of sense to do so. The Armour Plate protects the lower half of the door. Because it is a fire-rated door, it does need to have the F suffix for fire rating. It can be used on doors up to 90-minute wood doors and up to 3-hour metal doors. 40 inches high is about the right height to be able to protect the bottom of the door without interfering with the lock set. You can see this goes right up to the bottom of the lock. The distributor who supplied this project did a very good job of detailing this to get this to line up perfectly. And countersunk for the oval head fasteners and beveled foredges just makes it a little nicer look and feel. And this does come with a UL label emblem embossed in the Armour Plate itself. Any protection plate that's over 16 inches above the bottom of the door needs to be fire rated, including, you notice the wraparound edge guard also has the UL symbol. The edge guard is the same height as the Armour Plate and should be, and you've got to pay attention to the model number. If the door edge is beveled, then you want the edge guard beveled as well, the same 1/8 inch and 2 inch. This particular one is only an L shape. It only wraps the push side of the door, and you have to coordinate the width of the Armour Plate to go with the edge guard so that they don't overlap each other. And you notice that this does cover the bottom portion of the Mortise Lock case. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to specify this notched for the hardware. And you can order it from Rockwood or whoever. You give them the template of where you want that cut out. And then this edge guard would come down and over and allow the full faceplate of the Mortise Lock. The cons of doing it this way, this looks nice and this works great. But if you do have to take this lock off the door, that means you have to take the edge guard off first. That's one of the drawbacks to doing it this way. The cutout, of course, the drawback to that is you have to make sure to detail that properly and order it from the factory properly so that you have the right cutout for those doors. So both of those are acceptable ways of doing it, and it's up to you to coordinate which one that the distributor supplies. Overhead stop, just a surface mounted standard duty for high traffic doors. Actually, sorry, it's a heavy duty, the 9 series, surface mounted. And the way it's specified, the X indicates that's where the size would be. And by being a specification set, if there's multiple size doors in this set, this way, the X just indicates you fill in the size. The cost of them will probably be the same, but you've got to, whoever is the supplier needs to do the takeoff based on the actual width of the door. Smoke seal is not required on all fire rated doors, and it's not required on 45-minute rated doors. These are wood doors, category A, positive pressure with built-in intumescent in the edge and around the perimeter. The smoke seal, the S88, is for the early stages of a fire for the cool smoke. And while it's not required, it is a best practice. It also, smoke seal helps against odor and against sound. And in hospitals especially, it's a very inexpensive way to help cut down on not just smoke, but odors and sound. Very inexpensive and easy to apply. It is adhesive backed, compression silicone. You can get it in different colors depending on the color of the frame. The black charcoal is the most common. Here is the set one more time, and I'm going to open it up. Does anybody have any questions on the process behind this particular opening or any of the hardware items that were used? And again, just remember, when writing a specification, there's more than one way to do anything. There's guidelines and there's best practices, but as long as you make sure that the hardware works together and works and doesn't have any conflicts, that's very critical. And then the other thing is, keep in mind that longevity and durability is key. Is there a general rule for when edge guards should be used? If you're going to have armor plates, and if the door is going to get a lot of traffic in and out with carts or beds or stretchers, that's the general rule for when edge guards should be used. Because if you're going in and out with a cart, that leading edge of the door and even the hinge edge of the door can be a target to get hit. What is stopping the door? There's an overhead stop, the surface overhead stop. Wall stop wouldn't work here because of the shelving behind the door. And in this case, the operations narrative is very simple. This is a battery operated lock, valid key code for entry, and free egress at all times. Key override if the battery fails. Can I show the stop? I will on a different opening. This one, the distributor actually did not supply the overhead stop, and I'm not sure why. So it's not on there. It was specified, but I do have other openings, maybe not today, but in the ones that we will be looking at, I do have a concealed overhead stop that you can take a look at. Yeah, no problem. We've got lots of hardware we're going to take a look at. And if there's no more questions, I'm going to move on to the next opening, which is a pair of doors into a storage. Could you omit the overhead stop and use a closer with stop? If the door closer is mounted parallel arm, you can. The hard part is when it's regular arm, there aren't a lot of good stop arm for regular arm out there. If it's a parallel arm, then yes, you can use an overhead, you can use a closer with a stop built in, and some facilities prefer that. The rule of thumb and what DHI has always taught is each piece of hardware does its own separate job. An overhead stop has a bigger spring and it spreads out and disperses the force when that door hits the cushioning spring. It spreads it out over a much bigger area along the width of the door than the little parallel arm shoe would. The Norton Unitrol arm is a very good, it's got a heavy duty spring in there and it will cushion and stop. And those are used when you can't use an overhead stop. So yes, there are times if you're using a parallel arm closer where we're specifying a built-in stop arm instead of an overhead stop will work. But I do know that hospitals, because of the durability, an overhead stop is superior. If you can use it, that is the preferred method. Okay, this storage area is a very small storage, but it's a pair of doors. and we're going to take a look at this. There is no fire rating. There's no card access. There's nothing funny about this opening. We'll take a look at the hardware set. It is a pair of doors that are 7'4" by 7 foot wide. So they are a little wider than normal. Wood door by hollow metal frame, non-rated. Here is the hardware set. We'll take a look at the individual items after we take a look at the video of the opening. I want to make sure that you look at the flush bolts when you watch the video. You can see how it's just a little lever that you pull down, and we are using the flush bolts top only because of the cleanliness. We don't want any strike into the floor. We'll take a look at the video and then talk about each item separately. And when the inactive leaf is closed and secure with the bolt, the active leaf is the one that you'll be coming in and out of that storage most commonly. But if you do need to open the inactive leaf, there is no closer on the inactive leaf. You hit the manual flush bolt, flip the lever with your hand, open the door, move whatever equipment in and out, and then securely latch the door manually before the active leaf closes. Hanging the door, because they are wide doors, this is a lower frequency opening. It's lower frequency for a couple reasons. First of all, you notice the depth of that storage space is very shallow. So people are not going to be going in and out of this storage. It's more like a closet size. And you're not going to be using, there's not a lot of traffic in and out, and therefore just standard weight hinges. But because they are wide doors, we still want to use the 5-inch high, 5 by 4.5. That allows us to swing the door 180 degrees. This door is on a corridor, and 180 degrees, as long as there's nothing stopping it, the doors will swing the full width of the opening. The manual flush bolt, DHI, when they go through the format of a hardware set, you always secure the inactive leaf first. So the manual flush bolts are listed before the active leaf. And in this case, we have one manual flush bolt, 555 by 557 to suit door type. So the 555 is typically going to be for metal doors, and the 557 is typically for wood doors. And the 557 would be mounted up here and wrap around the top of the door. A wood door company can machine the door for the 555, and that's what we ended up using. The reason that we ended up using the type of flush bolt that's going to be used for a metal door in a wood door is because this is 12 inches down to the center from the top of the door. So for a 7-foot high door, this made it easier for the nursing staff and anybody that's height challenged like myself to be able to reach up and flip that lever. If this were a wraparound at the very top, it makes it very difficult to get up there without some kind of step stool. And the way that they found this out was during the mock-up, we had some doors with the flush bolts corner wrap, and the nurses and the staff were asking, is there any way we can get those down lower? It makes it very difficult for us to reach that. And as long as there's no problem with the door manufacturer machining for it, they're the same price. So you can use, I believe they're the same price. You can use whichever one works better, and the owner preferred to use the 555. There's no coordinator needed on this particular opening because there's no closer on the inactive leaf. This is not a fire rated pair. And even if it were fire rated pair, because this is a non-occupied room, this door is allowed to have manual flush bolts with no door closer. And the only time you need a coordinator, the very next opening that we're going to take a look at does have a coordinator on it because it has closers on both leaves and it has automatic flush bolts instead of manual flush bolts. So coordinator is not required here. And then there's another question, is there such a thing as a manual flush bolt with a heavier duty throw rod? I have a behavioral hospital where patients are breaking the standard manual flush bolts. I have never heard of one. I would send a note to Rockwood and ask them if there's anything they can do to beef up that rod. It's a threaded rod, so it's got to be a particular size. I've never heard of one. They wanted to use the same type. They could have used a storeroom function lock. This is a storage area with a mechanical key. But again, hospitals do try to cut down on the number of keys that they give out to their people because most of their staff are going to want to either use a key card, a credential access control card, or a code to get in. And what they'll do is they'll program each floor so they're all the same on that particular floor. But if you're not supposed to be on the on this particular floor, your code won't work to get into the storage room. And that's the same thing they do with staff toilets and any place where they use this type of lock. They'll program one floor or one section all the same and different from the other sections. So yes, you could use a storeroom function lock, or you could use access control with the hardwired through the door. This owner wanted to go somewhere in the middle and go with the keypad, and we use the same exact function as we did on the clean workroom from earlier. Delayed action because it is a storeroom, and we are using this just on the active leaf only. They did go with armor plates, and I'm not 100% sure why. Whatever that they were storing in here, it's not the kind of storeroom where you can push carts in and out, but they did want to protect the door, the bottom of the door, for the full 40 inches. And same thing, you would just make sure to coordinate that with the height. This is not a fire rated opening, but again, smoke seal and the smoke seal astragal are always a good practice, any doors in a hospital, to help cut down on sound or odor as well as smoke. And sometimes your corridor walls are smoke partitions, and so you may need it even though it's not a fire rated door, it could be a smoke partition. Here is the recap of the hardware set. Do we have any further questions on this? The next one is similar. It's a storage, but it's for med gas. And med gas is your canisters of oxygen and CO2. It's a very similar size, but you notice that this is a 45-minute rated, and we do have card access. This is a little higher security because of what is being stored, but it is a med gas storage. It's only 35 square feet. It's not big enough to be considered high hazard. So we don't need exit devices on this door. This isn't deep enough to have a person inside this storage closet, if you will. It's only 2'4" deep. So they're going to be storing canisters of oxygen and CO2. That's why it's fire rated, but it isn't considered high hazard. And a non-occupied room, this is definitely very clearly a non-occupied room. A fire rated pair of doors, the Inactive Leaf, could have manual flush bolts and no door closer. That is the way that it was specified originally. I specified it that way because that meets code. However, if you recall from our code session, sometimes even though the building code, and we have multiple codes for this project, there were 4 different codes that this project had to fall under. And if there's any conflict between one or more codes, you have to go with the more restrictive requirement. All of the requirements in the codes permitted manual flush bolts and no door closer. But the Joint Commission that comes and does their annual inspections, they can interpret anything they want. And this hospital did not want to take the chance that 10 years after the project was built, that a Joint Commission inspector would come in and determine that because there was no closer on that leaf and because it was manual flush bolts instead of automatic flush bolts, they wanted to err on the side of caution. And Joint Commission and Medicare and Medicaid funding is very huge when it comes to a hospital. So even though this was code compliant without the door closer and using manual flush bolts, at the last minute we revised the hardware set, and that is why we used closers on both leaves. We used a automatic flush bolt for the top only, and a coordinator. The coordinator that is selected in this case is a gravity coordinator, which you'll see in the video in just a second. And in one of the upcoming sessions, we do have a pair of lead line doors with a soffit mounted coordinator. This way you'll get to see the difference between the two. But normally I would use a soffit mounted coordinator. This was a last minute change, so it was a change order cost change to the owner. But they chose to be more restrictive than even what the code says, just to be safe. This hospital is going to be around for 60, 70 years. They didn't want a future inspector to come in and say, nope, we're going to write you up, and then have them change it out at some point in the future. So this was an owner decision, even above what the code says. We'll take a look at this opening. With automatic flush bolts, you can just pull the inactive leaf. Once the active leaf releases the latch on the automatic flush bolt, then you can just push or pull the door open. And the coordinator makes sure that the active leaf doesn't close before the inactive leaf. You see the roller drops down and it's longer, so that holds the active leaf, and it's got a rubber bumper. Then that lifts up the wheel and allows the active leaf to close after. Here's another good view of it. You can see it's down. This raises it up. And then once that active leaf hits the automatic flush bolt, it projects the bolt into the head. If this were a top and bottom set, it would throw the bolt to the top and the bottom at the same time. But we're using just top latch only on the automatic flush bolts. This is a standard 6-foot wide pair of doors, so we don't need heavyweight hinges. It is a more secure closet, and because of the access control, the doors swing out. We are using the NRP for these. You could use NRP on any outswinging storeroom type door, but because this one has access control with the card reader on the wall, the hinge that's in the center has the through wires, and you notice that we say QC XX. The number of wires as required. Whoever is supplying this would check on how many wires they need for the request to exit switch and powering the lock, and then figure out the length of that wire and put that into their detail. But just standard weight, 4.5 by 4.5 inch hinges. These doors are only 3 foot wide, not a high frequency opening. Question is, what happens if the hinge is 4.5 by 4 inches? The 4 inches is the width of the hinge, which moves this barrel closer to the frame. The door, because there is no trim here, the door would still be able to swing 180 degrees, but this barrel would be a little closer to the frame. It's just a meter. You can do 4.5 by 4. Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with that. Most distributors stock 4.5 by 4.5 inch hinges. So with the 4.5 inch wide hinge, you've got 1.5 inch clearance. If there is any kind of trim, this would make sure the door can swing 180 degrees. But yes, another option would be a 4.5 by 4 inch hinge. There's nothing wrong with that at all. The electric hinge with the QC option, you just want to make sure to select the appropriate number of wires required for your lock. We secure the door, the inactive leaf first. So flush bolt top only, the 2940 automatic flush bolt. And you can see this has the little latch that sticks out, it projects. This piece comes with the coordinator, and this is what raises up the coordinator. This is a strike plate that comes with the automatic flush bolt so that when this hits the latch, it projects into the top. The coordinator, the gravity coordinator, there's a 7-inch projection. This is on a pivot, and you see this is the piece that will ride up on here. This has a roller bumper on the end that holds the active leaf. And once this pushes this entire assembly up, this wheel rolls off the top of the door. The inactive leaf closes first, and then the active leaf closes second. Would anything change if this was considered high hazard, or did the hardware they chose meet those requirements? Yes, what would change if this were considered high hazard? If this room were big enough to have enough med gas to be considered high hazard, then you're required to put exit devices on this pair of doors. That's the change. Any high hazard, regardless of occupant load, and typically there is no occupant load in a high hazard, so you would be required to have exit devices on that pair. The Mortise Lock is a fail-secure Mortise Lock. That means that when the power goes out, this door will be secured. The key override is if the power goes out and you use your key, you can still get in. Free egress from the inside at all times. Yes, that type of coordinator, the gravity type coordinator, is not recommended in a high school. That is correct, because kids like to jump and grab things or take their buddy and put their coat up on and hang them up off of there. So that is correct. They break off very easily in a high school. But being a hospital and being in a secure corridor where everything's out in the open, nobody's going to vandalize. You don't have to worry about vandalism in a wide open area of a hospital. So back to securing the door, the active leaf, card reader on the wall, momentarily unlocks the outside handle. When the door closes, it is secure again. Free egress, inside grip, always free for egress. Take a look at the other items. The 109X is the lever handle design and the rose design. The M92 request to exit. A lot of times when you have access control openings, you want to monitor somebody leaving so that you know that it's not a forced entry. And so the request to exit switch is built into the inside handle, and it just tells the alarm panel, don't go into alarm. CT7 SD is for a temporary 7-pin construction core. The permanent cores are on a separate line. Those are by Medico. Delayed action for the door closers. Again, heavy duty door closers. These are parallel arm because the doors swing out from the storage room, but delayed action gives them a little extra time to move those canisters in and out and not have to fight with the door. Smoke seal, including the astragal, just the adhesive type. If this were a high traffic cross quarter type door, then I switch to the brush type astragal, which can take a lot more abuse of frequency of use. These are not high frequency doors, and this is very durable for this application here. The Electrolinks harness, you can look at the size of the door and make sure that it's between hinge and lock set or exit device trim, and pinned on both ends or pinned on one end only, depending on whether you're going to have the doors with the wires already put in or not. And then the operations narrative: valid credential outside unlocks lock momentarily for entry, free egress at all times. Lock is fail secure and can use key override during power outage for entry. The fire marshal, the AHJ, is looking for the free egress at all times. And if it doesn't have free egress, then you need to put in what portion of the code. I do have some examples. Some of the hardware sets that we'll look at in the next few days will have some that are stairwell reentry, for example, where the lock has to be fail safe and it has to be tied into the fire alarm system. You notice there is no mention of the fire alarm system here because we have free egress. And then here is the hardware set one more time. Does anybody have any questions on this or anything that we've covered today? If we don't have any questions, that is, I do want to point out, if you are an architect, we do have specification writing services. Here is the website where you can find the specification consultant in your area. Assa Abloy, we work hand in hand with architects all across the country and internationally. If you have a project, you need a spec writer to write your hardware spec, we're more than happy to do that for you. And if you have any questions beyond today, or if you have any suggestions for openings for the 8th day, I've got a bunch that we won't be normally covering, but if you have one in particular that you're looking for, please shoot me an email and I'd be happy to include it. Have a wonderful day. Look for the recording. If you miss any of the sessions, you can catch up, and have a safe and wonderful day, everybody.